Welcome members to this first meeting of our planning committee for the 3rd of February 2022. Welcome back all the members of the committee, the mayor, councillors, independent Māori statutory board members. And I wish you all the very best for the year ahead. It's going to be a very busy and fast-paced year. At today's meeting, Glenn Wilcox is the alternate member for Independent Māori Statutory Board member Tō Henare, and Independent Māori Statutory Board member David Taipari might be joining us, though he is travelling in the Hauraki district at the moment, I believe. Kalinda, can I please pass to you for a roll call, please?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bartley.
Morena.
Councillor Casey.
Morena, Kalinda.
Deputy Mayor.
Morning.
Councillor Collins.
Kia ora, Kalinda.
Councillor Coombe.
Morena koutou.
Councillor Cooper.
Kia ora, and I just want to give my condolences to the Independent Māori Statutory Board for the untimely and sad passing of Leanne Nāmane.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Dalton.
Morena.
Councillor Filipaina. Councillor Fletcher.
Present.
Mayor Goff.
Mata Marie.
Councillor Henderson.
Morena.
Councillor Hills. Councillor Mulholland. Councillor Newman. Councillor Sayers.
Present, thank you.
Councillor Simpson.
Morena, morning everyone, and condolences to IMSB on Leanne too. Thank you.
Councillor Stewart.
Good morning.
Councillor Walker.
Present.
Councillor Watson. IMSB member Karen Wilson.
Kia ora koutou.
Councillor Young.
Good morning, 大家早.
Member Wilcox.
Okay, good night.
Right. And I can see, Chair, that Councillor Hills is now on the call, and we've got Chair Taipari on the phone as well.
Kia ora, thank you. So members, I will move the apologies, noting Independent Māori Statutory Board member Tō Henare for absence. I'll move Deputy Chair Councillor Bartley. Would you second, please?
Second, Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you, members. Members, I would like to now go to an acknowledgement, and some members have already mentioned this. Members, early in this new year, we lost a former member, a very recent member of this committee, Independent Māori Statutory Board member Leanne Nāmane of Ngāti Tamatira and Ngāti Maru, died following illness. If we could all now just take a moment of silence to reflect on Leanne's considerable life and her appreciable contribution to Tāmaki Makaurau and Komiti Whakariti Māhiri. Following the period of silence, we'll hear from Independent Māori Statutory Board member Glenn Wilcox. A moment of silence for Leanne.
This is what everything takes. It's just terrible, the internet.
Te te kiri, wete te kiri, tātara mo te kiri, onga te kiri, kei mihi ki wauri, kei tangi ki wohoa, tangaroa whatia, tangaroa tara, anga tonu koe ki te reinga ki manawa tawhi. Whati, ko koe kei mihi, ko koe kei aroha, kei mihi ki wauri, kei tangi ki wohoa. Alien, hoi nei taku tangi, hoi nei taku poroporo aki mo. Haere rā e te riana no te ki o te ao. Haere ki te whare tūturu o te tangata ki te puta nui a rehua. Whiti koe maramaru a pū korokoro mai te tāhuna kei toto. Ngaki parawai koe, ka anu he ki te papa i Hawaii. Wai te tere re ua hora, no e te ui horaki. E hoki koutou ripa ki te whenua, ki te tōtarara ia. Tēnei mātou, hei runga i te toka nei, ka tanginoa ki ti kaparaya. Haere atu rā te ngaru mahana o te kapa moana. Haere atu rā e te pairoa rahi. Haere atu e te mano te whenua, haere atu rā te mana tamate rā. Haere atu rā e kahukura. Haere atu rā e tutu toroho rā. E pautini, re atu rā i te ao nei ki te ao atu rā. E ngā kahua maru, moke te tirohanga. Haere rā e te whanaunga e rien. Oki rā kātau. Tēnā koe, te rangatira, tēnā koe.
Mayor Phil.
Kia ora tātou, tēnei te mihi nui ki a koutou. Kua hinga te tōtara I te wā nui a tānei. I think for all of us, and I was contacted by IMSB Chair David Typery on New Year's Day, were shocked at Leanne's passing. It was something that we did not expect, and it was something very clearly that we deeply regret. And as the Maori saying goes, her passing is like the falling of a totara in the forest. It leaves a big gap, both for us on Auckland Council and for the Independent Maori Statutory Board. It's appropriate that we're recognising Leanne at this committee because for nearly 3 terms she played a big role on this committee and made an enormous contribution. And she was uniquely well qualified to do so. She was qualified in both planning and resource management, but she also provided us the Ta'ao Māori view of the world, and she bridged those 2 different areas, and in that sense, it will be very hard to replace her. She always performed her role with dignity, diligently, and with integrity. We'll miss her for the person that she was, her personal qualities, such an easy person to get along with, to talk to, and we'll miss her for the experience and the skills that she brought with us. To her children, Moana and Ruby, both quite young, we pass on our deepest sympathy and our condolences at the premature passing of Leanne, which will affect her family first and foremost, and obviously affects all of those of us that were her friends and that worked with her. Leanne, haere atu rā, moi mai, moi mai, moi mai.
Thank you, Mayor Phil. Members, firstly, my condolences, and on behalf of the committee, to Leanne's very big whānau. It struck me when I heard this only very recently of Leanne's death on Tuesday morning. It really hit the pit of my stomach. Leanne served on this planning committee and its predecessor, the Auckland Development Committee, for some 7 years as a representative of the Independent Māori Statutory Board. She combined her extensive knowledge, as Mayor Phillips outlined, the experience of the planning realm, with her understanding and really deep connections with all mana whenua and all Māori. She was an absolute significant contributor to our committee, strong advocate for mana whenua around the legal framework and the development of the unitary plan, special housing areas way back then. And she helped guide Council's position over those 2 long, hard years of the Auckland Unitary Plan. She was also a member and very active on the Unitary Plan Committee. She formed part of our group delegated to make decisions in response to the Environment Court and the High Court, the appeals being put there. And we received Council's decision on the Auckland Unitary Plan, and that took some 5 years, right through the 2021. She was active in that work. This was quite demanding work. She was always one of the first to be responding to the hundreds of emails and memos from staff, the external lawyers and the consultants that were sending information to the 2 delegated groups that we had operating at that time. It was an enormous task. Leanne was always there. It was through this time I really got to work closely with Leanne alongside my time at the Horeke Golf Forum as well, where she was formidable. She was absolutely committed, Leanne was. Decisions were required at that time on the Unitary Plan, the appeals with requests for 24-hour turnaround. Sometimes within an hour we had to get back to the court, and Leanne was always available, one of the first to respond. Leanne was highly knowledgeable about planning, about environmental matters, about development issues, and she was expert in the matters of te tiriti, a Waitangi, and te ao Māori and mā tauranga Māori. She was engaged, she took an interest in everything. She was engaged with the Auckland Plan refresh in 18. No bystander was Leanne. She was active at the committee and outside of the committee work. She's been a member of our planning committee since it first started in late 2016, right through to late 2021 when she stepped off for health reasons, as it turned out. She ensured that the planners reporting to the committee adequately and regularly, consistently considered Māori and mana whenua values in their reporting. She was a stalwart. She was a massive contributor to all of us. So on behalf of all the elected members and our staff who she worked closely with, I acknowledge Leanne's tremendous work over these years, her unwavering commitment to our planning committee. The work of the committee has dealt with numerous matters of importance to Tāmaki, Makaurau, and her contribution was vital to the outcomes achieved and that will be achieved. She was astute, knowledgeable, really articulate and convincing, always approachable and always open-minded. But for me, one thing that I'm left with, if I have a picture of her smiling face, is she had a big heart for all people. So her presence in the planning for Tāmaki Makaurau will be missed. Leanne, you have left a really indelible mark upon which Māori and all Aucklanders will benefit for generations to come. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa po namo te moana. Kia tere te karo hirohi e mua I tō huarahi. May the calm be widespread, may the ocean glisten as greenstone, and may the shimmer of light ever dance across your pathway. Haere atu e hoa Leanne. Members, feel free to say your own words.
Mr. Chairman, if I can just add something, I just want to acknowledge Councillor Alf Filipina, who represented us in the midst of the holiday break, went down to Paeroa with Chair of IMSB, David Taiperi, and I just want to put on record the thanks of all of us, Alf, for the contribution that you made on our behalf. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Filipina, I was intending to go to you now, but please contribute.
Chair, most of the things have been said about it and how we all respected Leanne, but I just wanted to acknowledge, obviously, the people that accompanied, and I was humbled enough to go down to Paeroa to represent Auckland Council. I did say to her family and at the marae at Paeroa that all our love and prayers are with the family, and that's from everybody, including Jim Stabbock and Megan. Megan was another one that worked very closely with it. John Duguid as well. So I mentioned all the staff as well, because as you know, Chair, and you were there as well with the unitary plan when we went through and took the hearings. Leanne was part of that core group that I had as chair of the unitary plan through the hearings process. So ngā mihi ki a koe to everybody who has said something to Leanne. I just want to mihi everybody, and yeah, was just so humbled to represent. Kia ora, thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor Alf. Are there any other words from members? Ngā mihi nui, members. Leanne Namani, Ngāti Tamatira, Ngāti Maru. Harira. Members, will continue with our business now, and we will go to item 2, a call for declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest to be notified for this meeting? There being none, I will now go to item 3 and move the motion to confirm the minutes on the open record of our meeting of 30 November 2021. Motion's on the screen there. Can I have a second from the Deputy Chair, Councillor Bartley, please?
Happy to second, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bartley. I'll put that motion then. All those in favour say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. The motion is carried. Item 4 is petitions. There are no petitions. Item 5 is public input. There have been no requests for public input for the meeting. Item 6 is local board input, and there were no requests for local board input for this meeting either. Item 7 is extraordinary items. Nothing has been brought to my attention, so I'll go to item 8, and this is at page 11 of our agenda. This report relates to providing feedback to government and the Ministry for the Environment on the transformation of Aotearoa's resource management system, a large body of work. The motion is to delegate approval for this work. The only change here, Mayor, members, is the Mayor will be represented by senior staff. So, Mayor, don't take this too seriously, Mayor, but we'll strike out the Mayor's name. The Mayor will be represented by senior staff in the motion before us. So we'll just take out the word Mayor in that motion. So I will...
I'm happy with that, Mr. Chair.
Good, thank you. And I will now hand over to Karen Kirk, Principal Strategic Advisor on Auckland Plan Implementation, and Denise O'Shaughnessy, Manager Strategic Advice, to outline this item for us. Karen Kirk, in your hands, I think.
Yes, thank you. Morena koutou. I've got a short presentation. Kalinda, can you bring it up?
Yes, we'll bring that up shortly, Karen.
Thank you. we move on to the purpose. Yes, so this is the latest round of engagement being led by Ministry for the Environment on reform of the resource management system. And basically, it's to update stakeholders on where the government is up to in the reform process. And it's a restricted range of ratepayers. It's mainly local government and Māori. And also they're outlining their key components of the system design to date, where ministers have made decisions, and to get feedback on these. And ultimately, the feedback will inform the Natural and Built Environments Act bill and the Strategic Planning bill to be introduced in Parliament in late 2022. Next slide, please. So this is just to highlight where we are in the process. This is Council's third submission on resource management reform. It started way back in 2019 with the establishment of the review panel. Council made a formal submission on their issues and options paper before they released their report, New Directions for Resource Management in New Zealand, which outlined their recommendations to the government. Middle of last year, the Natural and Built Environments Act exposure draft was introduced to Parliament. It went through a select committee process, and again, Council made a formal submission. The select committee has released its report in November, and we circulated a memo to elected members shortly afterwards, which brings us to the current engagement. We're calling it feedback because Ministry for the Environment are looking for feedback on their discussion materials. Next slide, please. This just gives a very brief overview of the key components. Basically, it's proposed that the Resource Management Act is repealed and replaced by these, well, 3 acts ultimately. Natural and Built Environments Act, which will outline stronger national direction within a national planning framework and set out the process and content to be covered in new natural and built environment plans, which are quite similar to our unitary plan. The Strategic Planning Act will set out the process and content to be covered by regional spatial strategies, which are quite similar to our Auckland plan. And regional spatial strategies are expected to have stronger implementation arrangements through implementation plans and agreements. Next slide, please. This just outlines local government's role within the system. Probably one of the key changes is that regional spatial strategies and natural and built environment plans will be developed by joint committees involving central government, local government, and also iwi, hapu and Māori. We expect to see a stronger role for Māori within the system, and we'll also expect to see a stronger role for monitoring and oversight. And the final slide. This is just what happens next. So we're working to a deadline of the 28th of February. As I said, the feedback will inform the bills, which are expected to be introduced later in the year. The Climate Adaptation Act we're not expecting that to be introduced until 2023 after the election. However, Ministry for the Environment have signalled that they'll be consulting on principles alongside the National Adaptation Plan quite soon. So basically, we're just seeking delegated authority for final sign-off of the submission. We're building on the points that we've made in the previous submissions, but there's some specific questions which we've gone out to staff and CCOs to fill some of those gaps. So, kia ora.
Kia ora, Karen. And Karen, I take it I'm sure members will be interested in making sure that our feedback is distributed, and there might be a bit of a quick turnaround time, but before it's formally lodged, members will be able to see it via email. correct?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, members, we have a motion before us. Can I have a mover for that, please? Mover and seconder? Do I have a mover?
I'm happy to move, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bartley. Do I have a second, please?
Happy to second, Chair.
Councillor Collins, thank you. So the motions are before us, members. Are there questions, members? It's reasonably straightforward at this stage. We'll be getting into the thick of this work later on. I do have one question here. Patai from Independent Māori Statutory Board Member Karen Wilson. Kia ora, Karen.
Kia ora, Chair, and kia ora, Karen. What a great name, eh? My pātai relates to any inclusion of recent engagement with Māori or mana whenua that may be included in feedback, or any key themes that potentially in previous engagement that Council may have had that will add. That's my pātai.
Thank you, Karen. Back to Karen.
Yes, absolutely. Ministry for the Environment are engaging broadly with Māori and specifically mana whenua. We've heard that they've already approached the mana whenua forum and that they will be preparing their own feedback for Ministry for the Environment. And absolutely, we're building on previous submissions, which had quite a strong component, and also feedback from Independent Māori Statutory Board. Key themes that have come through so far. There's the establishment of the National Māori entity, and Ministry for the Environment are inviting feedback on what their role could be. At the moment, they see their role in providing oversight of the system. A strengthened role for mana whakapono arohe agreements. I think Auckland Council is one of the few that have actually implemented this, and we can certainly provide feedback on that. And also a much stronger role for Māori in monitoring the effectiveness of plans and the system, as well as involvement in the committees that develop the plans.
Thank you very much.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, Karen. Further questions I don't have. Karen, this is probably a little bit unrelated. It's not so much maybe directly part of government's work on their reform of the resource management system overall, but it's about signalled national policy statements. I'm referring to the national policy statement on productive land, which the Minister for the Environment indicated that it was going to be released probably about March last year. I wrote to the Minister about that time, inquiring, and gave him some information about the depletion of prime and elite soils that our research unit and our monitoring unit had uncovered, which is drastic. So what do you know of the status of the National Policy Statement on productive land that was signalled? Has your unit or another part of our organisation, might be the strategy unit or plans and places, had discussions with ministry officials about the reason for the delay and the timing of when we might see that NPS on productive land?
Yes, I believe it's plans and places that have been following this quite closely. We've heard that the work has been delayed as a result of COVID, and we're expecting the final NPS later in the year. I believe this item comes up. Well, sorry, this issue comes up in relation to a later item on the agenda. So I'm sure they'll be able to give more comprehensive update then.
Okay, we'll pick it up at that item then. I think that's item 10 from memory. Okay, Karen. Members, further questions? I don't think I have any. It is moved and seconded. So I'll put that to the vote now. The motion's before us, the A, delegating authority, and the B as well as outlined. Putting that motion now, all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Aye. To the contrary, no. And declare that motion carried. Thank you, Karen. Now we will go to item 9, and this is reasonably straightforward. This relates to a request for a private plan change in Papakura, which has gone through process. The motions before us today are to approve the private plan change at Great South Road and request staff to undertake the necessary statutory processes as per normal. Can I ask the councillors for the area, Councillors Newman and Councillor Dalton, would you put your name to moving and seconding this, councillors?
Happy to move. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can I take Councillor Newman first and then Councillor Dalton as the second? All fine with that?
Yes.
Thank you, councillors. Now, the Senior Policy Planner that has shepherded this through, and thank you for your work, Leanne Lucas, along with Celia Davison, Manager of Planning Central and South. Leanne, just a few brief words. It's end of process. It's been well socialised, and over to you now, please.
Yes, I'll just introduce Leanne. So Leanne, if you can just talk to this item.
Thanks, Celia. Through you, Chair. Thank you, everybody. Yes, this is a plan change out south. It was one of the lower hanging fruit. That's the name that it's been given. It's effectively they are working with the Drury Parrata structure plan, and they are seeking to rezone from the future urban to the zones that were indicated in the Drury structure plan. So they're working with that. They are looking to live zone it to mixed housing urban with an area of neighbourhood centre there. One little area of contention was the placement of an indicative park into the structure plan, which was indicated in the Drury structure plan. Putting the park into the plan change, which was indicated in the Drury structure plan. That has been put in there as an indicative park. It's not placed anywhere because that's another process, obviously, where we seek to acquire the land. But yes, it's been fairly straightforward. The infrastructure in the area is sufficient to support this. So yes, that's all I have to say on it.
Thank you, Leanne. Questions, members? Any questions on this particular private plan change? I think the questions have been raised through the process. I have a patai from member Karen Wilson. Karen.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll keep this nice and short and sharp as well, I think. My question is, in terms of paragraph 26, the applicant committed to integrating the recommendations from Ngāti Tiata in their CVA. Is this query, is this commitment at the applicant's discretion, or is there a mechanism to somehow monitor and ensure that this has life breathed into it, so to speak?
Through you, Chair.
Karen. Leanne, sorry.
Yeah. The CVA was a clear understanding that was put through the plan change process with agreement from the applicant, and the understanding is that it will be honoured at the later stage through the plan change process, so through the development process. Is that
Member Wilson, you're satisfied with that?
Yes, they're on their honour, so to speak, is what I take that to mean.
Yeah, yeah.
And you're noting that, Leanne, we need to have eyes for that and many of the other commitments made.
We do, yes.
Okay. And I have a further question from the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Cashmore, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. My question is concerning Veolia, which will be the controlling two waters per instrument here. So, given the challenges that we've experienced in the past in this area, so is the two water stuff all ready to go, fit for purpose and in place, or can be in place?
I'm not entirely clear on your question, sorry.
Is that to do with what water and wastewater?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct.
So Leanne, if you could answer what Watercare's response is.
Watercare.
Can I just go back to you? Can I go back to you, Councillor Cashmore? Maybe if we just re-put that question just to make it clear. I think it was, but Councillor Cashmore, can you just
right, so
put that question again?
Veolia is the controlling two waters authority in this area rather than Watercare, and there's a history. So I just want to know: is Watercare confident that Veolia's got this all in hand and has the capacity and the trunk lines to service the potential?
That is my understanding from the communications that we've had with both parties through the process.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's good, clear question and response. Thank you, Councillor. No further questions on this matter, and it is moved by Councillor Newman and seconded by Councillor Dalton. I will put that to the vote now. All those in favour of the motions A and B say aye.
Aye.
Aye. To the contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you, members. That takes us to item 10, members. Now, this is a private plan change request, Ohara Farm, some 32.5 hectares of land in Waiuku, down on our southwestern border. It's currently rural mixed zone, and the proposal is to plan change it to residential mixed housing urban. Now, there's motions before us, members, and I will move accordingly. Deputy Mayor, you're comfortable with those motions? If so, would you second?
Yes, I'll second. It has to go through the process, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So those motions are before us, members. Please note the red, and Kalinda, if you can make sure that we can see everything on the screen, if you could scroll up and down as members require, particularly noting the red in addition to what's in the agenda. And I will now hand to Celia Davison, Manager of Planning Central South, to introduce Chloe Trinouth, our consultant planner on this matter.
So Chloe is the reporting planner today. She's also our processing planner for the whole plan change. The report is really getting a request, clause 25, or the request for a decision on whether we proceed to process this plan change. So I'll pass over to Chloe because she's prepared a presentation and we can both answer questions. Thanks. Bye. Not bye. Thank you.
Morena, apologies, my camera seems to have just cut out, so I am a black screen, but I am here.
We can also see you.
You can, okay, because I can't see me, so that's good. Okay, I won't make any sudden movements then. I have a presentation that I can share with you and run through. Should I go through that now?
Yes, please proceed.
Okay, hold on a second. So the plan change is a private plan change at Constable Road in Waiuku, which is a rural town. The plan change is, so the Waiuku is, I've got another image of where it is in the southern sub-regional context, but the plan change is identified there by the red star. It's on the edge of the existing township. Next to it is a recent subdivision that's happening, residential subdivision. Then there's Waiuku College, so it's right on the edge there, and these here are some rugby park fields. So here's the location of Waiuku, the base of the Awhitu Peninsula. It's on the near the bottom of the southern boundary of the region. So basically the boundary to Waikato Regional Council is just right here on Constable Road, about probably less than 500 metres down the road. Then Waiuku has a direct relationship with Pukekohe and the southern sub-region. This image here is provided by the applicant to show the proximity of the plan change to the town centre. So the plan change is about 32.5 hectares. It's currently mixed rural zone and they're seeking mixed housing urban. I could make that map a little bit bigger if that would be helpful. I just have to escape from the presentation and blow it up. Or are people able to see that okay?
We also have it on Nexus, so we can enlarge ourselves. Please proceed. Okay,
thank you. What this is, image is useful in showing the proximity of the town centre. So we've got the walking 800 standard 800 metre walking radius that's usually used, and you can see that part of the plan changes within that. Most of the plan changes outside of it, but it is in close proximity. So it's next to the high school. There's a number of parks in the area. There's a supermarket at the edge of the town centre down the road there. There's a library at the end of Constable Road. So it's in relatively close proximity to a lot of the services and amenities of the township. So the current zoning, as I said, is mixed rural. The adjoining zones are mixed housing suburban. So originally this plan change did seek mixed housing suburban, but has amended it to be mixed housing urban to reflect the recent RM Enabling Housing Supply Act, which introduces medium density residential standards, and in order for the plan change to progress, it needs to be consistent with that. So the mixed housing urban zone is the most consistent with that. But the proposal is still for the same. They haven't changed the capacity that they're seeking and anticipate approximately 700 dwellings there. There are no real overlays or precincts or particular controls that have any particular consequence. There is obviously the aquifer, and there'll be, the main thing for that is making sure there's no contamination of that, and then the macroinvertebrate index there for ecological consideration. And this map just shows the zoning in the vicinity as well in terms of the town centre and other zones. So there's a number of different residential zones in Waiuku. There's actually, which I haven't shown, to the right, to the east, a large area of large lot residential. So there's large lot residential, mixed housing, suburban, single housing, and mixed housing urban. So it's got all of the zones in there for residential. Really doesn't have THAB though. In terms of topography and hydrology, these maps just to give a quick overview of what the sort of main features of the site. There are no water features or streams on the site. The Rangiwhea stream is in relatively close proximity, so it drains to that stream. There is a tributary that comes up towards that western corner, but what we're seeing on the site here are really overland flow paths and the indentation of the land that where water might pool. So the floodplains are relating to those overland flow paths rather than any large floodplains. And then you can see on the right here the topography. It's a relatively undulating, not particularly steep site. The highest part of the site is here at Constable Road. There's a bit of an escarpment there, which they'll be looking to largely retain. And this down here just shows the lower part. This is the lowest part of the site where the water will run to. So just an overview of transport infrastructure. Waiuku is essentially largely a self-sustaining or self-sufficient rural town. It has large areas of employment. They've got a recently zoned employment area that's been constructed at the moment, as well as its proximity to Glenbrook industrial area and Pukekohe. So the journey to work stats indicate that 56% of workers travel within Waiuku or the immediate surrounding area. So then the stats, and I've got that over here on the right hand side, show that very few people that live in Waiuku are actually travelling to the CBD. So it is really a southern sub-regional travel pattern. The strategic transport network is really those main roads out of Waiuku that connect to Pukekohe and to South Auckland. So Linwood Road through to Hingaia, and then Glenbrook Road that connects up to State Highway 22 between Pukekohe and Drury. Obviously there will be additional train stations as we know at Drury West and Pairata, which will help to service this area as well. But there is no identified impacts on that strategic network from the applicant's assessment. They've basically, their assessment is that there's only local roading impacts. So that will need to be assessed in further detail when we consider the merits of the plan change. There is existing bus services, so there's one from Waiuku to the Papakura station, and there's one from Waiuku to the Pukekohe station. So we can see that the service to Papakura station is only, they've got 2 in the morning and 2 in the evening for commuter service, and the one to Pukekohe is a bit more frequent, but obviously not a particularly frequent bus network there due to the size of the population. Water and wastewater infrastructure is in place in Waiuku for the existing population and the settlements around it. In terms of water, it's groundwater bore. The assessment and discussion with Watercare is that the plan change would require additional water abstraction consent. So that means the volume of abstraction they can take at the moment would have to be extended in order to provide for this plan change. There'd be the usual upgrade to local networks that happen with any urban extension, and there would also be an upgrade to the water treatment plant, plant, required to be considered, and that conversation still needs to happen in further detail with Watercare around how that would happen. In terms of wastewater, there's an existing wastewater treatment plant that would need to be upgraded to accommodate the additional flows from this plan change and the usual upgrades to the local network. There is also the Sub-West sub-regional wastewater treatment plant that has been planned for a while at, I believe it's at Clark's Beach, to capture the growth anticipated at King's Seat, Clark's Beach, Glenbrook Beach, Waiuku, in that general area. So the issue with that is, whilst that's being proposed and will provide additional capacity, there's a question as to whether or not it is designed to accommodate this additional growth. So at the moment it's been planned and designed on the growth that's anticipated. This is an additional 700 dwellings that isn't currently on the radar because we didn't know it was going to be happening or on the cards. So that may require, or is likely to require, the existing consent to be revised in order to increase the flows and discharge from that additional development. So that's an issue that would need to be worked through. Key features of the site are soils. So there are elite and prime soils on this site. So using the council's unitary plan definitions, there's approximately 17% of elite soils. That's the blue here through the bottom of the site, and then approximately 64% LUC class 2 and 3 prime soils. Now this map doesn't quite match that because the applicant's assessment, which I've got down here, is the same in terms of elite soil, so that's the 17%. In terms of prime land, they've excluded this area, which is actually meets the definition of the unitary plan as being prime, but is an area of peat soil and is very wet. So when you then assess the productive potential of that soil for horticulture, the assessment has excluded that as being prime land. So then that, if you did that, and that again needs to be tested through the merits of the plan change, that would reduce the amount of usable prime land to 24%, meaning that over approximately 59% of the site is not usable for productive purposes. The other thing to note on this map is this site here is 45A Constable Road. That is the back of what has recently been developed for residential housing. They have an earthworks consent that covers the whole site, and that has been earthworked, so there is no productive soils left on that site, therefore it wasn't included in the soils assessment. But as I've included that in terms of the percentages of the overall plan change. And we're talking about, when we say 17%, I think it's like 5 hectares. So the numbers of hectares are relatively small in comparison when you're looking at the proportions. And that is the end of the slideshow, so I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chloe. Thank you, Celia. Just at the top, before I take a question from the Deputy Mayor, probably for you, Celia, excuse me, the National Policy Statement on Urban Development. Look, I don't have the words in front of me, but it referred to the need for territorial authorities to respond to plan changes. Can you just tell us, I think this might be one of the first plan changes that's come before us since that NPSUD come in. I could be incorrect in that regard. Can you just tell us, take us through how council has to respond to plan changes as per the NPSUD?
So if they are recently lodged, like this particular one, if they show that they are going to incorporate, or there's an ability to incorporate the medium density, the MDRS, the medium density standards for the particular medium density housing, then that can proceed. It can proceed and be processed as normal through the Schedule 1 process. So that one, if once it gets through and gets its decision, then we can, it will just go into the unitary plan as per normal. And by that stage, we will, in August, when we include the changes to the plan through our intensification plan change, we will be including all the MDRS standards into that. And that will be aligned and in every single relevant residential zone. And once this plan change comes in with an MHU zoning, the MDRS will be incorporated and applied to this piece of land as well. So by having it as an MHU zoning, I think originally they came in with a mixed housing suburban zoning, and now they've changed it to a mixed housing urban zoning in order to have more alignment with the mixed density, medium density residential standards. So they have got a statement in the provisions to say that they are that is the intention, so that when it goes out for notification, the public are clear that the medium density residential standards will be incorporated into into that zone. So yeah, so it can proceed.
Okay, thank you for that. I've got further questions on that, but I'll firstly go to the Deputy Mayor, followed by Member Wilcox, please. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you, staff, for the presentation. Yeah, this one has come out of the blue a little bit. I wasn't expecting it. My first question is concerning the commercial and quasi-industrial estate that's been newly developed. Do we know how many jobs are potentially going to be created there?
Through the chair, there was a reference to that in the economic assessment. I don't have it to hand. I can have a quick look At that, I'd have to come back to you, sorry.
That's all right. I think it's a reasonable number.
It is a reasonable number, yes.
The other question I have is, this is a large development, it's 2,100 to 2,500 people basically. That what, on the percentage rate, what would that increase the township of Waiuku by?
I believe the population is around somewhere between 8,000 and 9,000. So that would be a large increase, yes.
25 to 30% increase, yeah. And then my last question is to do with the wastewater. You mentioned that, and I know that Watercare's work has been held up by an appeal, which I think has been resolved, and they're hopefully planning on carrying on works. But they weren't predicting this amount of growth in one sort of whack. So this developer would, I imagine, have to contribute a substantial amount for that new plant development, and I guess those talks will be had with them over time. But that's going to also be challenging for them, I would imagine. But I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Now go to Independent Māori Statutory Board Member Glenn Wilcox. Glenn, kia ora.
Thank you, Chair. Has any in-depth discussion occurred regarding transport in and out of Waiuku?
Kia ora, through the Chair. The integrated transport assessment that was prepared by the applicant has identified that most of the traffic would go along King Street and through the two roundabouts that are there, but has not indicated that that would have any significant impact on the way that those intersections currently work. So I understand from his assessment they're currently at a level of service sort of A or B, which is the highest level of service, and the assessment did not indicate there'd be any significant reduction to that. I suspect that will be an ongoing issue of investigation as the plan change progresses.
Yes, I think my concern is and again this will come out, is up there by the hospital. I mean, that's the only way out basically, and so there's a real issue there. The second one is the impact on the rugby club. With having 700 houses up there, what will this mean? Because we've had it, especially up in the west, where neighbours get a bit cranky when people at the club are practicing at 8 o'clock at night. Have we kind of thought about this recreational kaupapa that's going to now impact on the town? If we've got what is it, 2,500 people living there? My God.
Thank you, through the Chair. Yes, there is some provisions in the precinct to provide for some, just trying to think what it is, I think it's fencing and screening, but obviously that would be relatively minor in terms of I don't think it would address, I think your concern would be around the noise issue. Don't think that issue specifically has been considered. It's been looked at more in relation to the benefits that having that open space in proximity to the plan change would be, and then also the potential to take a road through that plan change area and provide additional connection to the Auckland Council land there. So no, it's not a specific issue that I think has been addressed, and I'd have to check as to whether or not they've actually consulted directly with the rugby club.
Okay. And finally, so we've only got the New World and the Foursquare in town. Are they able to cope with the extra people that will now live in the town, or could we be thinking of building another supermarket in town? And do we have the land?
Through the Chair, I did, when I met with the applicants and did a site visit, just coincidentally, they did mention that there was a countdown coming. However, I have no way of verifying that, so that's merely a comment that I heard. So I couldn't comment on that really.
Chair, could I just ask one more question? Have we done a structure plan for Waiuku? And that's my final question.
No, we haven't.
Celia? We haven't.
No.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
No,
Thank you. Sorry, Celia.
Sorry, no, we haven't.
Thank you, Celia. Thank you, Member Wilcox. I'll now go to Councillor Henderson, please.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions from me. First and foremost, I'm a little bit confused about the soil quality issue. So when we're addressing prime and elite soils, assessing them, do we not take into account things like how damp it is? Because if it's not usable for the purposes of prime and elite soils, doesn't that defeat the purpose of the classification in the first place?
So, through the chair, recently at the hearing for Plan Change 55 for Patamahoe, Council provided legal submissions around clarification of interpreting the framework for the definitions of land containing elite soil and land containing prime soil. And I guess there's a process. So yes, first and foremost, in terms of prime soil, there's a basic definition that says if your land use classification is 2 or 3, you are prime soil. Then you need to go through an assessment that determines whether or not that has actually got productive potential, and in terms of the RPS policies, is significant for food production. So it's like a sieving process, I guess. You first got to identify, does it meet that definition, and then whether or not it warrants protection. So you're right, it's not just about the classification.
Okay, that makes sense. And just the last question from me, but there may or may not be a follow-up. I hope I'm not the only one that's a little bit confused by the climate impact assessment. I was wondering if you could talk us through it, please.
So I think I'm acknowledging in the agenda report that obviously there is the Council's policy directives to reduce vehicle emissions and greenhouse gas emissions from vehicles, and just to acknowledge that this is a rural town which does, although it has a bus service, is pretty limited, and so will be largely car dominant, and that is identified and acknowledged in the applicant's integrated transport assessment. I think the question, or I guess what I'm trying to say there is, we don't, for the purposes of this consideration and assessment, there's nothing to indicate that it's a matter that you would use to potentially reject it, but it is a matter that would need to be considered further in terms of considering the merits of the application. So I'm acknowledging it, but I guess I'm not saying whether or not it's particularly contrary to it, other than yes, it is going to increase vehicle kilometres, so therefore would have an increase potentially in greenhouse gases.
Just one follow-up, thank you, Chair. So if we are to vote through and accept this plan change today, would that be kind of giving support to that view that actually more climate impact assessment is needed, or would we be accepting that actually there are impacts on climate change that are negative?
Through the chair, I think it needs to be given further consideration. It's an issue that Auckland Transport has also raised in terms of their concerns with the plan change. Ultimately, if the plan change is accepted and goes through the assessment, there's obviously a range of matters that need to be considered, not just this one. So it would have to be assessed in the context with everything else that has to be considered. And yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Member Karen Wilson, please.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chloe, for that comprehensive presentation. Look, my IT is really bad at the moment. I can't even see my Nexus, let alone the item necessarily, but I'm going to moot it in this way. I'm aware that a CVA was submitted by Ngāti Tiata Waiuhua, and I'm wondering what consideration in terms of this application was given that, and specifically, and I might be winging it here in the sense I can't see anything, Schedule 1, 25 R4. So I'm asking what, if anything, cognizance in terms of the application has been taken of that. Has it been signalled in Ngāti Te Ata's CVA that this has significance, and was it matched up, the application, in terms of the schedule that refers to that impact? Hopefully that makes sense, Chloe.
Okay, I'll just have a quick. So 25.
Subsection 4.
So in terms of the CVA, the applicant consulted directly with Ngāti Te Ata, obviously, and commissioned the CVA. They have committed to ongoing engagement through the process. They have included a number of provisions in the precinct to try and reflect the CVA in terms of expectations for consultation, also specifics around integrated stormwater management and riparian planting, and the process for naming of roads and things like that, which would happen at subdivision stage. In terms of your query around clause 25.4, I'm just trying to understand, is this in terms of, I guess, are you thinking around best practice consultation? Is that sort of the question that you're asking clarity on?
Yes, so in terms of the CVA that was submitted and the ability for council to look at that, plus the application to be able to include or not notification, I guess, in terms of objecting, Chloe, I think that's what I'm trying to say around that subsection. And was that considered in terms of this application? And if so, were there any matters that need to be, I hear from the previous kōrero, investigated, or more more inquiry needed to be made, is really what I suppose I'm driving on.
Okay, well, the CVA is fairly extensive in terms of describing all of, not all, I'm sure not all, but Ngāti Te Ata's interests and history with the area and all of the concerns that they would like to see addressed. In my review of that, in the precinct plan provisions that have been provided, I think that it generally implements that. I obviously can't speak for Ngāti Te Ata in terms of whether that's their view and whether they expected to see more in the precinct, but I would expect that to occur through either the submission process, if they wanted to make a submission, or through their ongoing engagement with the applicant themselves, if they wish to see a better reflection of their CVA in the precinct provisions. So at this point, I think it appears to be consistent with what the CVA from Ngāti Te Ata was indicating.
Thank you, Chloe.
Thank you, Member Wilson, and Councillor Hills now, please.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair. And I guess Councillor Henderson took part of my question around the climate impact statement, just how we're supposed to consider climate change, since it's coming with the RMA changes anyway, but also we're required to, as a council, and we have a climate plan, if that is supposed to be considered as part of our plans and policies. So first is the climate. The second is why I've read why we can't reject it, but I guess I want to investigate that further around sound resource management practice. As the Deputy Mayor said, that it is a significant increase in population. We know that it will be car movements, but also the developer says that there is capacity in the water infrastructure, but Watercare says there isn't. And there's no plan for this in the future urban land supply program. So I'm just wondering, the threshold seems ridiculously high for a rejection if none of that could be considered for a rejection. So I guess I just want clear advice again on why none of that is considered for potential rejection when it sort of goes against everything, the Auckland plan, the climate plan, everything else that council's doing. Thank you.
Back to you, Chloe.
Through the chair, I think from my perspective looking at this, one of the things we need to consider, or I am considering for myself, is the fact that Waiuku is a rural town. It's existing, it has the schools, it has largely the amenities that one needs, and generally people have employment in relatively close proximity. So we're not talking about a entirely isolated sort of dormitory residential community that has to get in their car for absolutely everything that they need to do. There are options available for walking and cycling. Yes, there would be car travel, but I guess in a southern sub-regional community, it is not, it's within the context of that community, I expect, and it's not that, I guess, the information that's been provided that will need to be tested more is whether or not the travel will be local. If the travel does start to, if the proportion of journey to work was showing that 80% of people in Waiuku were travelling to the CBD, then I think it would be a slightly different assessment, because that would obviously be more vehicle kilometres travelled and a significantly greater increase than if they are actually shorter trips or don't even have to be vehicle trips for some of their day-to-day activities, and particularly going to school. I hope that answers that climate change question a little bit more, but not.
Yeah.
Councillor Hills, you heard?
I guess the issue I have is that if you're looking at a 20 to 25% increase in population, I couldn't really see how you wouldn't expect, unless we're suddenly providing 20%, and I know the numbers don't work exactly, but a 20% increase in job capacity within Waiuku, or the surrounding suburbs. I would assume, and especially if they're going for mixed housing urban, that there would be a slightly different mix of population, potentially younger people, families coming from outside the area. So you would assume that the car travel to the city, because there is no public transport, would be high. Not to the city, but definitely further than just local. Yeah, I just couldn't imagine that not happening.
Sure, through the chair, so the economic analysis that's provided to support this plan change is very much identifying a gap in the Waiuku's housing market for the older population, and the need to provide options for ageing in place, because there are no, I think there's a very small retirement village in Waiuku, otherwise people have to move to Pukekohe or elsewhere. So that is part of, whilst that's not the primary, they're not, obviously we don't know whether that will be the outcome, but that is certainly part of their assessment. So not just the fact that there's, in the applicant's view, demand for housing in Waiuku, they're specifically looking at the demand for 55 plus. So, I mean, obviously people 55 plus still work, so it's not to suggest that reduces necessarily the travel, but the demographic of what that community may be could be quite varied.
Thank you, Chloe. Thank you, Councillor Hills.
Just on the
Councillor Hills again.
Just sorry, Chair, on the infrastructure, just how when we know the massive bill we have coming for the areas that we've already got approved that we don't have funding for, what is the basis to reject it, based on the fact that even Watercare says there's no budget allowance for that?
Through the chair, my understanding is that whilst it's not planned for and therefore there's no funding identified for it, what the applicant's assessment demonstrates in their view is that there is capacity. Now, whilst Watercare has come back and said that's not the case in their view, these conversations do tend to develop somewhat through the process, and it usually comes down to who's going to pay. So if there was no sub-regional wastewater treatment plant on the cards, it may be a more significant issue, but there is actually something being developed, and I think there are options for the developer to be able to contribute to that, which would need to be worked through with Watercare. And I fully anticipate that Watercare would do a submission on this, like they did for Patamahoe.
Kia ora, thank you.
Kia ora, thank you. Well, members, welcome to responding to the National Policy Statement on Urban Development and the Enabling Housing Supply Act, if it might be called that, but it is legislation now. And here we find ourselves having to contend with that now. Our choices are limited. So I just want to go probably to you, Celia, and I don't know whether you were on the call earlier. I probably asked the question in the wrong place. The question of the government leading in its resource management reforms on a national policy statement to protect productive land. We know that in the nation and in Auckland, we've lost some 95% of our wetlands. That is just inexcusable. And we're fast going in that direction in the loss of elite and prime soils. You know, the food basket lands that surround Auckland, I think some 20% of the nation's vegetables or particular vegetables come out of that Pukekohe catchment, for example. It doesn't just feed Auckland, it feeds the nation. So question to you, Celia, why, and surely it can't be just because of COVID, has government not come forth with its national policy statement on productive land? We've already been grappling with these issues on a private plan change in Clevedon, private plan change in Patamahoe, and now a private plan change here in Waiuku. What does your unit know about the MPS on productive land?
So we've actually got we got Ryan, who we spoke to Ryan, who is our person who knows a lot about the MPS not MPS on soils, and he has been in conversation with the ministry to find out what is happening. The latest he's got is that they are thinking that they will be releasing something in about April or May of this year. So that's the latest information that we have. But according to Ryan, he's telling us that they've told us this before. So we can't guarantee that that's going to happen, or we can't expect that to happen. But I think that that's the latest information we have, is that it's approximately April, May, that something may be released around the soils NPS.
Sorry, what's the something?
That's not guaranteed.
What is the something, though? I haven't had a reply to my letter to the minister regarding this of March last year. Now, and I understand that our staff have been struggling to get information out of their colleagues at the Ministry for the Environment. So what is the something? Is it an MPS? Is it a memo? Is it a...
It's just emails between Ryan and officers in the ministry. That's all there is.
I'm asking, what is the something that's going to be released in the month you identified?
Hold on. So he's saying that that they anticipate that they will get the NPS soils through the cabinet for gazetting in late March or April, and it will take effect 28 days after gazetting.
Okay,
that's the latest he's got on that.
That's better. That's the MPS productive land is imminent.
Yeah.
Then.
Yeah.
Okay, that is good news. Okay, that might address in part the motion asking myself and the deputy chair to follow up on that. Okay, I look forward to that. Can I just go to the mixed housing urban zoning that has been updated? Initially, they were looking at single house zone and mixed housing suburban. Am I correct? that the 700 dwelling unit yield, is that if there was a mixed housing urban build out to the feasible level, or can you tell us something more, Chloe, about what the developer expects to build out? So I guess my question there is the intention of the developer, who originally wanted to just go for single house zone and mixed housing suburban, and still can still build that and not go, 3-story mixed housing urban, is that the yield you're talking about, or is the yield of 700 dwelling units and 2,500 people, is that the product of a full build out of a mixed housing urban to the limits permitted by mixed housing urban?
Thank you. So yes, you're right. They initially sought mixed housing suburban, and the calculation there was 700 dwellings. They've then updated the zone, but they haven't changed the build out. So their economic assessment in response to the MDRS implications of doing that is that their market assessment is that the maximum MDRS 3 dwellings, 3 stories built form would not be something that the market would build at Waiuku because of it being a rural town and the current character and the community that's there. So again, that's something that we would investigate more thoroughly when we consider the merits of the application. But for the purposes of understanding what they are proposing, they've maintained that the capacity would be 700, and that's what their infrastructure assessments are based on.
Okay, that sounds like an outcome that Council signalled in its submission to the bill, ironically. Okay, my other question, I think I've satisfied my questions. Look, members, are there other questions here? Councillor Newman?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning, Celia and Chloe. Just with respect to the funding available for infrastructure, and I know that, look, I've seen this play out before. Can you just confirm the usual process here is that the application indicates that they believe if an infrastructure solution is in place at hand, probably through their assessment of the asset management plans and the development plans of water care, for example, around the plants, and that they can basically connect into, and that they would pay a contribution. But it is quite possible, isn't it, that through the consideration of the plan change, they will say actually that they'll make their contribution, but once this particular plan change is live zoned, like a lot of plan changes get live zoned, they say, well, actually the burden actually falls on the council. And isn't there a risk here that that's precisely what's going to happen, that for the purpose of the plan change application, we get developers who are quite confident about their ability to contribute, but once the plan change has been adopted, then we see the development agreements seem to get skinnier and skinnier and skinnier when it comes to the developer's willingness to pay, and the burden of cost seems to be socialised back onto council. Isn't that the usual practice?
Through the chair, that is a risk. So what the applicant's assessment is basically relying on development contributions and IGCs to water care to say that that's a significant contribution to the costs of infrastructure upgrades with 700 dwellings. Water care in particular are saying that they haven't, I guess the issue at this point is that water care hasn't quantified the costs of what the upgrades would be. So yes, they've acknowledged there will be upgrades. They haven't quantified what we don't know what the proportion of those costs would be assigned to the developer at this point. So that will have to be worked through when the merits of the plan change are considered in a lot of detail, and I think is a key concern for this plan change. So I would expect that there would need to be some further certainty provided through the process that that is quantified, and that the developer confirms what proportion they would be willing to pay, and ideally you would have a funding agreement at the time you're considering that plan change, so it's all very clear and it's not left up to debate at the subdivision stage.
Thank you. If I can follow up, Chair, but yeah, look, I mean, I can see what's going to happen here. The plant is going to be developed by Watercare for the future growth of Waiuku, and all of a sudden a plan change has popped up and it's been live zoned, which basically wasn't in sequence and is presumed to basically swallow up a lot of the latent capacity that would be forecast by Watercare, but which Watercare wasn't initially considering because this plan change didn't exist at the time that the plant upgrade was considered. That's a real risk here, and my concern, Chair, and I think Chloe is addressing this through comments, is that this forces a real fast tracking of costings for what the infrastructure would cost, but actually the infrastructure costs will go higher, and almost certainly, we can have a development agreement in principle, but if the costs aren't fully quantified at the time that agreement is prepared for the purpose of the consideration of the plan change, if the cost goes higher in the future, the developers will say, we didn't agree to that. We agreed at the consideration of the plan change to the cost that was agreed at the time, and that's our contribution. But in a few years' time, if the cost is 30% higher because actually we've done the proper economics around that development of the plant and the necessary infrastructure, there's a real risk here that cost could end up falling back on the ratepayer and not the developer, because the developer wasn't party to the revised cost. Would that be fair, Chloe?
There is a risk of that. I guess just to reflect on what the applicant's assessment is. So in terms of your latent, swallowing up the latent capacity, I agree that's essentially what the applicant is suggesting they could do. The economic analysis suggests, and well, it's the view of the applicant that latent development capacity isn't feasible. So in their view, there is quite a lot of latent capacity and quite a lot of growth. I think the Watercare's study for the sub-regional wastewater plant is a population of 16,000 at Waiuku, and as I said, I think we're approximately somewhere between 8 and 9. So there is quite a lot of capacity there. I do think there is still a lot of investigation to determine whether or not, that would provide for this. There's a series of options. One could be that the applicant is right and there is capacity when they get down and actually look at the numbers, and then there's other options around, how much additional capacity is required, and that level of detail gets sort of worked through, I guess, the plan change process. But yes, sorry, to answer your question, Councillor Newman, I expect there always is a risk with a funding agreement that those prices could increase.
Chair,
Mr. Chair, it's Megan here. I'm happy also to.
Megan.
Yeah, do you mind? Sorry, Councillor
Yes,
Newman,
please.
you take your thoughts again, but just wanted to confirm again, we have been speaking with you last year, or really in the last 18 months or so. This is this big difficulty with us having to respond to plan changes and private plan changes, as the chair mentioned earlier, but also attempting to plan into the future for infrastructure requirements that we have, but not just that, but just in order to make good communities, and quality environments for people. But we're having to respond to private plan changes, and the Act at the moment has very limited reasons or ability for us at this stage of a process to kind of reject or not continue through to a process of looking at the merits and looking at all of this detail. It may be that once we go through the processing, that the application is rejected or declined. It may also be approved, but that's not the question that we're being asked at the moment. And this is the process, that we get to, and it becomes difficult for us. We try and provide you really clear advice and to tell you that there will be some issues, I think, particularly in the infrastructure area, and which is why you see a chair's recommendation about council doing a submission on this to ensure that these issues are raised and considered when it actually comes to the point of making a decision. But you are absolutely right in some of the risks you're raising. There may well be some costs that may or may not be fully met by the developers or the beneficiaries of this plan change and others. But that is what we need to keep working through this process. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Well, Chair, if I can just conclude with my comment on
yes.
your indulgence, Chair. Yeah, I'm certainly not. I'm not going to vote to decline the application because there's no legal grounds to do so, in my view. But this is a good example, Chair, of why the officials from MB and Ministry for the Environment need to sit alongside council staff and Watercare and Auckland Transport staff in relation to these plan change requests, because they need to understand the fruits of their analysis, which I think is pretty narrow. Because if the council were to reject this plan change request in the future, whatever the merits of the council's decision around this, or to argue against the plan change at a hearing, the council will be perceived to be the great big roadblock to developing a solution to Auckland's housing shortage. But in reality, there are massive infrastructure deficits, and there is no obvious way to fund this because the developers' commercial interests are not served by the developer paying the full cost. They want to minimise the cost to them and socialise the cost for everybody else. So, thank you to Chloe and to Megan for reflecting on this. But this is yet another iteration of the same old problem. The cost will go significantly higher as we understand the need to address the infrastructure, and I'm sure the developer will say, well, actually, most of that is not us. They will say that's a revision of a cost based on an assumption in the future. We identified our cost as per a development agreement very early in the process, and we had to do that because as we had to be party to that because we had the plan change request. Once this is live zoned, the pressure will come on the council to fund the lot, and it's a real trouble. It's very troubling because we know that the development agreements, the contributions that we receive do not meet the cost of these developments. They meet a part of it, but the costs will be much higher, and the ratepayers can't afford that, but we'll be up for the cost. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, you've been consistent in that argument, and as have I, and I think a growing number, if not all, the members around our table are expressing those concerns. So look, I really appreciate you reiterating those. They are very real challenges and very real risks that we're likely to face again. So thank you. And now, members, are there other questions before we go to speaking on this? I've got member Glenn Wilcox to speak. No more questions. So members, just in moving this, sorry, I have a question, do I?
Yes, sorry, I just can't organise myself to put it in the sidebar. Sorry, apologies. May I have a question, Mr. Chair?
Councillor Henderson. Sorry, Councillor Desley Simpson.
It's me, sorry. Yes, I was just listening to Daniel state the obvious. I was going to suggest that maybe we put something more specific than and any other relevant matter in C, noting that it is things like infrastructure, the infrastructure costs, etc. But my question is to staff, if we leave it open, does that mean we have more discretion to raise all sorts of things by leaving it as and any other relevant matter?
That was the intention.
Mr. Chair,
I'll go to Megan.
Mr. Chair, I'm
yes.
happy to answer that.
Megan.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Councillor Simpson. Yes, as you see in recommendation C, you'll see that we're talking about any matter that the council might be concerned with. We have put a noting there about infrastructure because that certainly will be one of the big things. But, you know, there's been questions around perhaps climate implications and things like that. So I'm in your hands, but my recommendation is that I think C is fine, and it enables both staff to do some more work, but also the delegated group to just consider what the areas of concern or support, of course, might be for the council. So I'm quite happy with C, but in your hands, Councillor Simpson, if you wanted to suggest anything else. Thanks.
Thank you, Megan. No, Chair, I'm happy with C. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Simpson. Thanks for raising that too. It's important that we capture everything. There's been a good discussion that's occurred here this morning, and I was thinking of adding the Chair and Deputy Chair of the Environment and Climate Change Committee as well. But look, we won't change it. But Councillor Hills, Councillor Coombe, I'll make sure that you're given an early heads up on the draft submission, and then we'll make sure we go to all the councillors and get feedback as well before it is formalised. So, members, I've moved this and the Deputy Mayor has seconded. I don't think for either of us it's tacit approval of this private plan change, not remotely so. We're accepting it for processing as the NPSUD reinforces now, even more so than prior. So, but that there are a range of issues here that we need to pick up, not least being the transport deficit in this area, the water deficit, supply and the taking of wastewaters, natural water, stormwaters, big issues around soils that take thousands of years to develop and then can be obliterated in one swoop of a digger or a bulldozer. Questions of who pays and who does not pay, and we will make sure that is all covered, and we will definitely address the climate impacts in our submission as well. We will cover all of that ground. So in supporting these motions today, I don't believe any of us are signing this off with agreement that it is a grand idea worth implementing. It is an application that now needs to go through process, and it will be tested by our council staff and others. So that is the intention. It is moved and seconded. I will now go to comment from member Glenn Wilcox.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think we find ourselves in an unenviable position here. I'm not persuaded personally that the social, economical, cultural well-being of the people that either move there or the town is going to be enhanced. I'm very concerned that there is no discussion really about medical facilities if they're talking about over 55s. And I think the thing that concerns me most is that we haven't even done a structure plan, so we've got no idea of the costs that are going to come upon us. And the final issue is actually we have three third-tier towns basically in Auckland. That's being Helensville, Wellsford and Waiuku. And this could turn into the Wild West really fast if we're not careful. And you're quite right. Agreeing to this does not give it approval at all. It's just that it has to go through the process. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Henderson, your call.
Thank you, Chair. I'm always reasonably happy to follow my learned colleagues in these kind of debates because I'm reasonably soothed by your comments, Chair. Also thanking Member Wilcox as well for his comments, which I fully endorse. And finally, Councillor Simpson, I was about to raise the same issue, so I'm glad that you raised it as well, because we do want to have a catch-all which acknowledges some of the other concerns that we've talked about. I'm not quite convinced about the soil issue, although I'm happy to kind of follow advice on that situation. But I think at some point we do need to put a line in the sand and say, look, the climate impacts of what we're doing is just too high. We can't keep building things that are going to increase our climate emissions and, on the other hand, declare a climate emergency and have these grand goals for reducing emissions. It's just not consistent, and it's not something that residents expect council to do. So But I acknowledge that these concerns will be picked up by the Chair and Deputy Chair and a member of the OMSB. I'm really comfortable with that approach. So, yeah, please don't take my vote in support for a vote to support the development, which, as it stands, frankly, I don't. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. We won't, and thank you. I'll now go to Councillor Dalton with the last comment.
Thank you, Chair. And really, I just wanted to commend Chloe and her responses to all of the questions that have been asked today. They were really helpful for me. I thought there was good context put around the discussion around the productive soil. And I also think there was good context given towards some of the economics and the benefits that this would hold for Waiuku. And I think it would be good for Waiuku, knowing the area a bit, but also knowing people who live in the area. But you know, it's out of sequence, as everybody is saying, and the discussions that we had last year about how we pay for infrastructure and what our priorities were going to be have somewhat been changed by the legislation. So I think for us, the discussion probably has already been had, but for me it is about how we navigate this, and Megan has said some work is going to be done on this, as did Chloe, around the discussions of the funding of infrastructure and looking at the different models. So we're not continually opposing it at this point because we're going to support it at this point, but we need to be able to provide housing in an area that is probably going to be more affordable than a lot of places. And we're making some broad assumptions that everyone that's going to buy there is going to drive where? Into Auckland for their job in the CBD. We don't know that. So we get quite hung up on all of the things that we don't want to happen, and we will miss out on enabling some good things that could happen. So I understand the financials of it and the sequencing of it, and I support the recommendations and would like just to make sure that we are going to figure out how we address the costs of infrastructure when we as we continue to go down this journey of new housing areas and developments. So Chloe, you were really clear, really helpful with context of how you presented today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dalton. That concludes those speaking to this. But members, I've just got a message coming through, and this is one of the challenges of electronic meetings and our remote working. Message from our Chief of Strategy via legal that we just need to look at something. So before we conclude this and go to the vote, we're not in vote yet. With your goodwill, members, and this is not consistent with the standing orders, but I think we need to hear from our Chief of Strategy. Is everybody in agreement on that? I just need to check. Everybody in agreement? We want the right outcomes from our meetings. Yes. Okay, so I will go to the Chief of Strategy, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, committee. Yes, I am sorry, this is a little out of sequence. We've just been having some background conversations, as the Chair has said, because we're remote, it's a little bit harder for us to provide you that clarity of advice sometimes. We just want to ensure that we're making the right references for you just at the beginning of the recommendation. So maybe, Sophie, if you could just move up, please. It'll be probably somewhere just in that first paragraph at A, where we're talking about clause 25(2)(b. All we wanting to do is just make sure we've got some references to these newer parts of the Act where it relates to these new residential standards, just so it's not changing any of the content of anything you've talked about or where you're going to go. It's just making sure that we reference the right part of the Act, so it's as accurate a resolution as possible. We're just drafting that at the moment. I'm just checking to see whether we've got those words yet. We may just need 1 or 2 minutes, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. So it doesn't change the content, it's just making sure we reference the right pieces of the legislation for you to make your decision. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Members, I think we might just let us take 5 minutes. Let's just stand adjourned for 5 minutes. I know we don't have far to go. all members, we could carry on and deal with the procedural parts of the balance of our agenda, but I think, Kalinda, you're involved with the discussions with Megan, so I don't think you can cover the balance of the agenda at this time. You need to discuss this with Megan, Kalinda?
I believe that we have just got the wording just now through from our legal team. If Megan's happy to continue with this, then we can go ahead. Although I'm happy to discuss a summary of information items and finish that up, Chair, to give the staff more time. I'm fine to continue.
Let's go to 11. We'll come back to 10 members. Let's go to 11, and that's just the summary. So I'll move the motion on the screen. Can I have a second, please? Councillor Bartley?
I'll second.
Happy to second,
Deputy Mayor.
Mr. Chair.
Okay, Councillor Bartley, thanks, Deputy Mayor. I'll take Councillor Bartley. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour say aye. We're on 11. All those in favour say aye.
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 Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Item 12 is consideration of extraordinary business. As I previously indicated, none has been raised. So that takes us back now to item 10. And how are we going there, Megan?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yes, look, I'm just sorry. Could you just perhaps give us maybe that 5-minute break would be great, and then we'll be able to come back to you. Thank you.
Look, let's take 5 minutes, members, and we will come back here at what's that? 11:50. Is it 11? Let's just make it 11:55. 11:55, and we'll reconvene.
Extension, if possible. I realise that you can't vote against it, but democracy's got to have some place if you don't agree to something. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Kalinda will make sure we pick your abstaining on this forthcoming vote up. Thank you. Kia ora, members. Welcome back. We'll reconvene. And Kalinda, have we updated the words on the motions? Okay, Kalinda's not with us as yet. Members, just bear with us. I think the staff are just working things out. Kalinda or Megan, are you with us now, please?
Mr. Chair, it's Sandra here. It looks like they're still working on that at the moment. You might need to give them just a couple more minutes.
Kia ora. Sorry everyone, Megan here. I am back.
Megan,
apologies.
With you.
Great. Look,
I'll hand to you, Megan.
Fantastic. Thank you. And sorry for the delay. This is really the first plan change we've had since the Act came into force at the end of last year. So what we're trying to do is just ensure we are crossing all T's and dotting all I's to make sure that the resolution or the advice we're giving you is as accurate as possible. Kalinda at the moment is just putting in some new words, which, as I said, doesn't change the content of the conversation that you will have been having. And I will take you through that when Kalinda's ready for that. So that will come up on screen when she's through. But it relates to the new clauses in that enabling supply bill, where it now says that all plan changes and private plan changes have to give effect to these residential standards. There is a discretion for council that where a plan change doesn't fully give effect or has any provisions that might slightly change it, even in a positive way, that there's the ability for you to still accept that private plan change, notwithstanding that it might have some slight changes to those blanket kind of provisions of those standards. So that's where we're at the moment, because there are some things that this plan change is proposing that is slightly different to those blanket provisions. But we feel that that's fine for the purpose of where we're heading at the moment and this particular decision, and that work will be one of the matters that we'll continue to work through in processing, and we could even make a submission on it as we have in section C in the Chair's recommendation. So you'll see up on screen the new AI in red. I'll just let you read it. It's a belts and braces approach that we're taking here, given this is the first plan change we've had since this Act's come into being. The Act is very confusing and not very well written in this particular area. And so we just want to be crystal clear that there are some small elements of this which is not entirely consistent with these MDRS, these residential standards. However, we're still recommending, and as per the conversations, that we process this, accept it as a private plan change through the process, and that council can make submissions, and it may well be on these matters, but it'll be on the matters that we've discussed over the last hour or so with you. I do apologise, the change is probably larger than I was expecting in the conversations we were having in the background. It's just something really new to us and the first time we've approached it. So, but I'm happy to take questions or any concerns that you might have. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Megan, and thanks to Legal and other staff, Kalinda as well, for looking at that. Are there questions on this, members, or is it straightforward? I just do want to make sure that you've got ample time to consider this. Are there any queries about this change? None. We're satisfied with it. Getting told I've got back. Sorry, I remember Karen Wilson. Did you have a question, Karen?
Yes, please. Megan, I suppose in a clumsy sort of way, with my reference to Chloe around referencing Schedule 1, 25.4, it was really about the ability to not accept or adopt a plan change. So in terms of the recommendations there, A1, which I mean, you hit on before, to be honest, are you saying that can you just explain that again? Because I guess that was the crux of it, that consideration around a cultural values assessment and alongside that subsection, what was the consideration that you put or not put? And now you're saying that you have, but there's another subsection that applies on a different schedule. So I'd like to get my head around what that means, please, because that was the point I was trying to drive on, but because it's so new, we're all coming to grief.
Yeah, through the chair. Look, fair enough. As I said, this is new for us, trying to understand this Act and quite how it applies then to private plan changes. Let me deal firstly, Karen, with your the question that you, or the conversation you were having with Chloe around the cultural values assessment, and whether that was a matter that could be used to reject this private plan change at this particular point in time. And Chloe's response was that the applicant has, for the purposes of this part of the process, looked to include as much of and to be consistent with that assessment, but that is a matter that is a merit matter, which will continue to be conversations and details and analysis of that through the process as it continues over the coming months. For the purposes, though, of Section 25.4 and those reasonably narrow reasons why a plan change could be rejected at this stage, our advice is that there is no reason for that to occur as in relation to the cultural values assessment and how the applicant is looking to outwork that. So not at this stage. The clause you see before you, the new one in red, is actually around clause 35. So it's a different one, and it's one that's come in force because of the new Act that came in at the end of the year. And what that Act says is that all plan changes and private plan changes have to give effect to these medium density residential standards. Where they don't, in a huge way or in a tiny little way, like, for example, a precinct, which in this case, putting a precinct on here might change some of those medium density residential standards. There is a discretion for the council to not accept this private plan change because it doesn't give full effect to those standards. There is also obviously the discretion to, yes, accept it. And so what we're saying here is that because there are some precinct provisions which are a little bit different to those blanket standards, we do need to say that yes, we still have discretion to accept this, and that is what we're going to do. So I hope that's clear. It is confusing. It's not the same questions of whether we should not accept this because of the existing reasons in the Act. This is just in relation to this Intensification Act that came through at the end of last year. So the content conversation we've had hasn't changed. We're just trying to be really clear. You do have discretion, and we're recommending that you use that to accept this and put it into the process.
Through the chair, thank you, Megan. I think it's incomplete. I think if one is using one that has more detail and relates to a different topic, if it's intended to trump what I was viewing in 25.4a, then that's not an answer. I accept what we're doing here, and I accept that it's new, but I would have
thought that because that clause of Schedule 1 has the ability to break the deadlock in terms of should we process or not, i.e. it says you can or you can't, and it's not, we've not, as in council, hasn't used it in that context before. My concern is that it would be used as a precedent in terms of you can get another clause from another schedule that actually you would say on the hoof that therefore gives you enough comfort as the planning committee to overrules a strong sentiment, but that's what I'm thinking. 25(4)A, because of where it sits, is strong in its view and might be vague in its subsequent subsections. But to use another schedule and then another clause, I wouldn't have thought that was, good precedent to be setting around the legislation and how we would do it, because we're going to get through this quickly. I have huge reservations as my last kōrero.
Kia ora, Karen, and just to be really clear, there's no trumping going on or one becoming more important than the other. They're two different elements that we're looking at now because we've got this new act. So we've consistently been saying that under clause 25, there are only certain reasons why you can not accept it or reject it at this stage. We don't feel any of those are met. We do feel that even though there are questions of merit, that needs to happen through the process. So that's the same in all of those, like items A2 onwards are all about that clause. This one's just in relation to this new clause relating to the new act.
No, I understand that. My comments remain. I'm still not comfortable and don't think that applies on this occasion.
Yep.
Okay, thanks for testing that, Karen, and thank you, Megan. I've got some other questions there too. Just at the outset, Megan, I'm just doing a little electronic exchange here, text and emails, and watching this meeting. But can you consider the A2? A number of councillors have raised the climate impacts, possible climate impacts of the application. Is there merit in the bracketed section at A2 after soils adding climate impacts? Now, these are significant, right? And I'm raising this because we're talking about emergency response here. Can you just give that some consideration and tell us whether there's merit in adding climate impacts?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yes, you can. Obviously, there's the Chair's Rec C below, which talks specifically to a submission that council might make around other matters. But and clearly, climate change is going to be one of those based on the conversation today. However, if you did want to add in climate impacts to that A2, then yes, that's fine. So. Sounds
just
like
checking with.
Let's do that. Then,
okay, I think do that. I'm just going to check with Councillor Hills, Councillor Coombe, Councillor Henderson. I think that's. I think all three of you would be making that point. Would you not?
Yep. Is it better to put it in the C, Chair, Megan?
I think we've got it up at A2, and Megan, if we cover it at A2.
Yes, that's fine. It's very clear the direction that you've set today. So clearly in the submission that we will put to you and to the delegated group, we will include matters of climate. So, yeah.
Okay, got it covered. Now, questions. Councillor Christine Fletcher. Chris Fletcher, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I put in the sidebar that my questions were responded to by Megan with her response to Member Wilson. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. Sorry, I'm just struggling to keep up with the reading on various devices here, and I think I have another question from Councillor Walker.
Sure, so I've just got a question about the wording in A1. I think it's rather clumsy. There are two separate but related issues. One is around 25(4)A Schedule 1, and then the other one is around 35(2) in the relationship with 35(1). I would prefer it if that statement was made considerably clearer, because an ordinary person reading that would not understand it. I think that it could be broken up into two separate sentences. I also think in part there's a relationship between what we're stating around this private plan change and the scale of the plan change as it goes to the issues that we're considering, which means that it's, from my perspective, a matter of some significance. And given the concern that others have stated around precedents and the like, because I think we'll see more of this, I think it's important to have our words right so that it can be easily understood. And if we can't get it right now, then let's delegate some time to the wording around that so we do get it right and it's crystal clear. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Megan, in the break, you've been sitting down with legal. You've considered how to frame this. You've come up with what is before us. Councillor, Member Karen Wilson has quizzed you well on parts of that particular A1 as well. Are you satisfied, and can you give us confidence that our senior staff are satisfied that there is clarity in the way these words are framed?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Councillor Walker. I'm not going to deny that it's a complex paragraph, but that is in direct correlation with the legal provisions. And I did mention that they have been drafted. There are some drafting uncertainties and difficulties in there. So, look, I am. I've had this reviewed, and written and reviewed by the legal team. And while I guess it is long and complex, I am happy that it deals with all of the matters that we have to deal with, that you have to deal with. And just to be aware, this will keep coming to you now every time we have a private plan change because of this new act. So, yeah, I'm not going to deny the complexity, but I am satisfied that that is appropriate, and I wouldn't advise breaking it up or trying to make it any clearer. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll leave it there. I think we've tested that one hard, members. We are talking about the Resource Management Act here, and maybe we could put that in full, actually, just so that we know at the top we're talking about the Resource Management Act. But look, I don't want to make a meal of this right now. And I think that exhausts all the questions. Have I missed anybody? Oh, Councillor Simpson, sorry.
Thanks. I was all good until Megan spoke just at the end. So you're saying we can actually say no now, right? But your advice is to accept it as it is, noting because the recommendations are as they are, you noting that all our concerns around infrastructure, funding, soils, climate change, etc., will be dealt with as part of the ongoing process. Is that correct? Because up till now, I've always thought you cannot reject, but you're saying you can, but your advice is to accept the request. You've noticed in 3, it's inappropriate to adopt the private plan change. You've got a full stop in a new sentence. I think resolutions aren't supposed to have full stops in them, but that's grammatical. We'll leave that for another day. But is that, am I in the right place now? Because I've rejected one of these before and got myself into trouble. So I'm not that I just want to know your advice is to vote for these because the concerns that we have will be dealt with as part of the ongoing process. Is that correct?
Yes.
Back to you, Megan.
That is, yeah. Sorry, through the chair. Yes, that is correct. So there's effectively now with this new act, this other element of how a plan change gives effect to these density standards. So on everything else that we've talked about, soils, infrastructure, climate, all of that stuff. Our advice remains consistent as we have, in the last few years with you, that there are very limited reasons why you can reject at this stage, and we don't believe there are any reasons for that. The second element, the new bit about the standards, that we're just doing a belt and braces for you, and we're saying again, there is no reason in our mind to reject it at this stage. And again, we will continue to work through that in the processing of the application.
Thank you, Chair. A supplementary. So if you said no, there's a risk that we would be in a legal process which would cost us money. Is that correct? Because there aren't enough.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Thank you, Chair. That sorted it for me.
Good. Thanks, Councillor Simpson, for checking. And I have one last question from member Karen Wilson. Karen Wilson.
Kia ora. In trying to look at a way forward, because clearly Megan had strong views through the chair on the application of Schedule 1 as it relates to the cultural values assessment, which is what I highlighted in the beginning. Now, in lieu of that, depending on how this vote goes, I'm wondering through the chair whether, as well as infrastructure funding, soils, climate impacts, the cultural values can be added there, so it's not just those pieces that will be looked at. You've got there as in particular. So if it is that's what's considered, which I do not believe at all, because I'm not sure how you council can assess a cultural values assessment and then apply clause 25(4)(a) and say it doesn't in terms of rejection. If that is the case, then I would like to think that there's an in particular there that can be applied, which alongside climate impacts and the like, and it talks to cultural values.
Thank you, Member Wilson. I'll go to you, Megan. On the face of it, I don't have an issue with that, and referring to cultural values. So, Megan, can I just check in with you, please? This is further amending A Roman 2.
That's fine if that's what you wish to do, Mr. Chair. Yep.
I just need to check with the other members. No objections there, members. I think that's the final amendment. Member Wilson, you'll be satisfied with that. And Kalinda, can you just put those words up so we strike out the word "and" where it is, we put a comma, climate impacts, and with the words cultural values, Member Wilson?
Thank you.
Cultural values. Good. Okay. Good contributions all round. I think we've all spoken to this, and we will now go to the vote. And at the end of the vote, I will note the abstention of Councillor Chris Fletcher. So it is moved by the chair and seconded by Councillor Deputy Mayor Cashmore. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. To the contrary, say no.
Chair Darby, could I please have my vote recorded against A? That's Councillor Hills.
Okay, and we're recording Councillor Chris Fletcher's vote of abstention and Councillor Richard Hill's against the A. Thank you. Are there any other votes to note? I declare that passed.
Oh, sorry, Chair, I'll go against A as well. Councillor Henderson here.
And Member Wilson, thank you, Mr. Chair.
And Member Wilson. Thank you. Members, that concludes that item, and I think it concludes the meeting, but I always like to check with Kalinda. Kalinda, we've concluded all our business today.
That's right, Chair.
Thank you, members. Ngā mihi nui. It's been a good one to start the year. Have a wonderful afternoon. Ka kite.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank
you.
Thanks, Chris.